In my experience, I mean, I love obviously working, what I do and working
Mm-hmm.
exclusively pretty much on the water. But, there are some properties that I've seen that I would never, you know, buy if I had all the money in the world, because I know the different challenges. And, almost every property has its pluses and minuses. There are very few that have all pluses on the water.
Hi, this is Michael Travis, the Waterfront Agent Podcast. Today we are meeting with David Provencher. I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. He is the president and project architect for Shore Design PLLC, and a Connecticut-based firm specializing in waterfront design and coastal permitting, combining an architectural background and a background with lifelong coastal experience. He and his team help clients navigate complex projects involving docks, seawalls, and living shoreline. Of course, New Hampshire has a total of, I believe, 18 miles of shore, so it's a different world than Connecticut. So here we are. Welcome, David. The whole world of ocean design, and you got a lot of shoreline, completely different than what we're used to. What are some of the things that you have to deal with that most people looking for a house don't need to ever deal with?
Yeah, it's, the really any shoreline, but certainly coastal shorelines are unique. There's a lot of overlapping regulations. A lot of times you're dealing with local, state, and federal agencies that all regulate that environment. It's the interface between private property and then public trust lands underwater most times. So you're dealing with not only with encroachment into public lands, but environmental considerations and then navigation as well. So there's lots of impacts that need to be considered before you do any sort of waterfront construction.
So is a beach public land for everybody?
So typically speaking, the mean high water line is the boundary line between private ownership and public lands. So private goes down to mean high water, and then below mean high water typically is public, available to the public and held in trust by a particular state. There are unique circumstances, and several states deal with it differently, but typically that's sort of the policy.
Right. And I have a client that bought a very expensive property in Hampton, and the builder, it seemed, didn't take into consideration it's salt water, and everything rusted. It's like, and I would predict that, designing a house that you're dealing, if you're facing the ocean, for instance, you've got a whole different level of architectural needs to deal with, like high winds and things like that. Would that be correct? And salt water.
Oh yeah, high winds, salt spray, flood zones are probably the three, biggest, I'd say. And then the closer you get to the water, you start to deal with wave impacts and erosion, things like that.
And when if you're up high and you're dealing with like a whole structure of rocks and things like that going to a public land, I mean, how does that work in terms of permitting? And of course, the cost of, I can't even imagine. Here in New Hampshire is all rocks. We can get rocks and stone anywhere. Just digging a trench in my house, I got enough for a seawall. I don't need a seawall, but what kind of really terrible things have you run into in terms of cost and surprises?
Yeah, I mean, marine construction is a specialty construction field, as you can imagine.
Yes.
So one of the big, I guess, pitfalls that we see is a new waterfront homeowner will just, not knowing that it's a highly regulated environment, will just hire anybody to do waterfront work. Someone who might not be specialized or have the experience, and then they get into trouble with poor construction, with no permits, fines, having to redo work. But marine construction, because it takes special equipment, it takes special knowledge, skills, experience, and equipment, certainly coming by water, coming by land. The cost is something that most people are shocked by when they first estimate a particular project. So what we see a lot in Connecticut, we'll see costs range from $1,000 to $3,000 a linear foot of waterfront construction. Yeah, it's so many projects that are just simple residential projects go into the six figures quite easily.
Wow. What was one of the most interesting projects you ended up having to do?
There's probably so many. I'm trying to think.
Interesting is an interesting word, because interesting could mean the most challenging thing that you had to do. Yeah.
Right. I know. I'll just go to like a recent project that we just completed in Stonington, where we were replacing an old residential dock that was extending out into Long Island Sound, and it had been destroyed by storms. And the reason why is that it was just poorly constructed and probably lasted, I forget, maybe 10 plus years. So our team was hired to design a replacement, and we try to work closely with marine contractors because they have a wealth of knowledge, and knowing their construction methodology and how they would approach it helps us improve our design that much more. So this particular project involved removing the old dock, but then drilling into bedrock with a below the surface. Wow. Yeah, with a barge mounted drill rig. So basically, like, you're pre-drilling holes, like you're, doing some work to your deck. You're going to pre-drill the hole and then drive the screw in. Very similar. Core out this big hole with a drill and then drive home steel pipe piles. So this was steel pipe pile supported dock and then wood framing above it. And we were able to do it with monopile. So instead of, two piles next to each other, we just did it with one larger pile down the center. So that minimized surface area, and we also elevated it as well. So that was quite the project that we're just wrapping up now.
Wow. I can't even imagine the cost, but here you can't just like put a crib dock in Lake Winnipesaukee,
Right.
And treated lumber is a big no-no. I mean, maybe not as much on an ocean. Saltwater treats things differently, I guess. And then if you're dealing with putting a dock in Long Island Sound, that's a governmental thing, I would think, more than just a state issue, or how does that work?
For the most part, it's two agencies. So the state, up in New Hampshire, you have the state DES, yep. I believe. Yep. And then, so here in Connecticut, we have the DEEP, or Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. So they regulate coastal development. And then the New England Army Corps of Engineers that actually regulates all of New England, Connecticut, New Hampshire included. So when we're preparing a design and permit applications, we're filing with both of those agencies.
So what kind of again, I think we briefly talked about it, but when you're designing a house, just on the house part, dealing with the ocean, do you primarily work on ocean projects? Or, it's not that there's a lot of lakes in Connecticut, as I recall, but.
Yeah, almost no fresh water. I always have those opportunities, but it's just, they just haven't come up. It's almost all coastal or tidal rivers. There's three major tidal rivers in Connecticut. Yeah, the Housatonic River and the Thames River. There's all kinds of smaller tidal rivers that we work on as well.
Right.
But we do some very little traditional architecture. So either mixed use buildings, some we've gotten into some affordable housing, but largely it is more, call it like support accessory structures. So whether it be docks or seawalls, bulkheads, living shorelines, that's our niche.
Hi. I was in East Haddam, Connecticut, and loved Essex and Deep River. And Deep River was named after a deep part of the river, I guess. But it's like, and of course, East Haddam has the bridge goes into the town, and there I'm predicting you're also dealing with historic commissions, if it's historic buildings and towns and whatnot, like any architectural project
Yes.
in a town like that. But really, people are going to because you have an expertise in the whole coastal title and things that people just don't even know. They just buy an old house, they want to tear it down and think they can just rebuild it, right? So they hire their little
Yeah.
architect person and buy some wood at Home Depot and think they're done.
Right. Yeah. There's so much more. I mean, in my experience, I mean, I love obviously working, what I do and working exclusively pretty much on the water. But, there are some properties that I've seen that I would never, buy if I had all the money in the world, because I know the different challenges. And, almost every property has its pluses and minuses. There are very few that just have all pluses on the water. Some that have great views maybe don't have easy access to the water. Some that have, say, a tremendous amount of acreage maybe don't have access to deep water. They have very shallow water. It's tough to find sort of the perfect property that is maybe protected in terms of the home above the flood zone, has easy access to the water, and has deep water. Like those, I mean, they're certainly out there. There's a lot of coast in Connecticut, but yeah, I think it's, when looking for a home, it's really understanding the pros and cons of each property. You sort of have to accept what it has and what it doesn't have, and then do your best to work with it.
Seems like you would be a good service if somebody's considering buying a property to talk to first.
Yeah, and I've done that from time to time, just to give them, we'll do sort of a permit search and evaluation of the waterfront. If there's structures, we'll give a conditions assessment, and then if they have a particular goal in mind, whether it be a dock or to rebuild a seawall, then we'll give our opinion on that as well.
And have you, a house was completely unpermitted, and then does it run into a problem? Somebody buys this property, which is they're buying the problems, that because everything was unpermitted and maybe done wrong, that they can't even do what they want to do. Or is there, because I don't know how that works in terms of,
Yeah, there's always a solution, so it's never just a hard no. It's just, varying degrees of an acceptable solution. A lot of our clients, not a lot, but a fair number, we work with them because they're either inheriting unpermitted work, or they themselves did work without permits.
Right.
And then somehow, someone drops a dime on them, with the town or the state, and then they get a unfriendly letter.
Yeah. Hold on one second. Hold on. Sorry about that. Yeah. So I found that a lot of times people find everything out the day after they close, and the neighbor comes over. It's like, oh.
Yeah. I'm a big advocate of just full transparency, especially for a big purchase like a waterfront home. I give credit to people that do their due diligence, and invest a little bit of money to find out as much as they can, so that they can at least go into the purchase just fully informed, and if they decide that it's too much for them, that they can back out. And I know that approach sometimes would kill a potential, deal. But, I think in the long run, that's the best service that you could give a potential home buyer.
I would think also it would be almost like, even if it's a pre-approval, some people they'll do a inspection in advance.
Yeah. Yep.
Because it's always more expensive to fix something than to fix it in advance, or it costs more for it to show up at a transaction than what it might cost. Because there was a sort of a ratio. It's like, a buyer will want 5 times the cost off than if you just did it, fix it. And let's say you have a family is bequeathed a knife. They don't know anything about the property. It would seem like it could be valuable for a service like you to be able to look at what's actually there for them to know in advance, like the unpermitted stuff and that, because it's going to show up, right? Anyway.
Yeah, it will.
And
Yeah,
so,
at some point.
well, yes,
Yeah.
like the day before the closing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen that. I'm sure in your experience that's happened, but and it all comes down to just buyer and I think their agent's approach,
Right.
To it. Or, is it thorough or is it just, hey, let's just plow forward and because we're in love with this place,
Yep.
So I don't
Yep.
know.
That's true. So have you always lived near on the water?
No, I never have actually, to be honest. Yeah. Yeah, no. I mean, I grew up in Manchester
New
and
Hampshire?
I went to school in Manchester. Yes.
Oh,
Yep.
okay.
Yeah. And so my family's all still there. And I left to go to school at Mass Maritime Academy on Cape Cod. And that was and got a waterfront view dorm room for 3 out of my
Oh,
years there.
yeah.
So I guess if you count that, then that's the closest I've been, But no, I mean, I grew up working on boats and house projects with my dad. And so I think it was just ingrained in me at a young age, that just, the love of water and working and just the freedom, that you have when you're on the water. And that just carried through, into my adulthood and profession.
So, of course, I always feel that our whole past is what makes our present, who we are. You said you worked on boats.
Yeah.
I mean, did you work on like schooners and things like that, or fixing boats?
No, I guess no. These were project boats. My dad would buy an old boat, and then we would work on it.
Oh, I
Probably,
see.
weeks and yeah, and then we always used it about 10% of the time. And it was 90%, fixing it up, and that's what the the enjoyment was. So I didn't get into actually, on boats until I went to college.
Oh, I see.
That's when it was more serious stuff.
Yeah, my daughter and I built a boat. The boat museum here has a program where you can build a boat, in a week.
Nice.
And I just finally took it out. It's on our beach. It's a mahogany sort of skiff. But she was 15 at the time. And, what we got is a boat out of it. It was the best project ever, Yeah.
I bet.
And of course she'll say that, oh, hold on one second. Let me get that. Hold on. Anyway, she'll say we had it on display, this little boat, and a lot of projects you do with your kids, sometimes the parents just take over, and I just made sure she was using tools and glue, and it was mahogany, and we varnished it, and we didn't paint it, and it was really fun, and she got to name the boat, didn't know what it was called until it was finished. It was called Free Spirit, that she came up with. I'm not sure about the free part, but that's it. It's like, but
well, it goes well together.
It does. But you're building something or fixing something that's all about the water. I'm sure that planted the seed beyond your dorm with an ocean view.
Oh, absolutely. It just never went away. Yeah, no, I consider myself very fortunate to do what I do.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I think that's so. When you went to the school, how did you translate what you were doing in school into starting this business? Really, I mean, it's a pretty specialized business.
Yeah, it is, and it's funny. So when I left school, I did a bunch of different things. I worked for this landfill reclamation project up in Newbury, New Hampshire, Mass, and then I went to culinary school actually because I thought that was my path. And then I got into food safety and public health for many years. And then I had an opportunity to move to Connecticut to go to work for a waterfront consulting firm. So I did that about 21 years ago. And then about just under 5 years ago, as I had completed my architecture degree and then getting my license, it was time for me to do my own thing and design my own life. And so this was the only path that I saw myself doing, is continuing to grow and sort of, I guess, realize, the vision that I had for a small waterfront design firm, so that I could lead it, with the vision that I had.
Well, that's great. I mean, you went to culinary. Did you go to CIA, or you went to?
No, so I went to a college that no longer exists, Newbury College in Brookline, Mass.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Yeah, it's just up the road from Cleveland Circle.
Okay. Yeah, I lived in Boston for a long time. So is he?
Yeah.
Whereas on top of everything else, my wife and I opened up a restaurant. So it's neither of us cook.
Really?
Yeah, we just point. It's called Mai Tai Bistros. She's Thai, so she's the Mai Tai, and I'm just the guy in the background. In fact, I'm the only untie. Wow. Because as if we're not busy enough, right? So,
right. Wow, that's exciting. Good for you.
Yeah, it is. And then she also took a course in becoming a hairdresser, and so now she's got that. Interestingly, that's a 1,500-hour course, and to become a real estate agent, it's 40 hours. So I don't know what that says, but I did discover a deterrent from geese, because geese are a problem on beaches.
Yes.
She practices on all these heads with hair, real human hair on it. I stuck them on the beach, and they don't like to see that. Well, neither do the neighbors, but.
Yeah, that's interesting. That reminds me of the Disney movie, the Rookie, I think it's called.
Mm-hmm.
It's called The Rookie? Yeah, where they did that same thing to keep deer off of the baseball field.
Oh.
They spread human hair around the field.
Well, these are human heads with, human-looking heads with real hair on it.
Oh, really? Okay. That's a little different.
It's creepy.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that sounds a little creepy.
Well, but you can imagine if she got pulled over by a cop and there's 10 heads in her back seat. It's like, and they're all looking at you.
Wow.
Yeah. Because that's a problem with geese. Geese are an environmental, issue with beaches and lakes and all kinds of stuff. So
absolutely,
I had these extra heads, so I just stuck them on the beach. It's as long as across, you can see across from that. That's a rail trail that people walk on, and then it's Lake Wentworth in the background. So I'm just waiting for someone to walk on that trail with binoculars, saying, there's some dead bodies over at that beach.
Yeah, you're gonna get a knock. You're gonna knock on your door soon.
I don't know if there's a fine for it. Who knows? But so far it's worked.
Yeah, I don't see any laws being broken, but I'm not a.
You mean it's not a shoreline thing? Have heads on the shore.
I don't know if that's a regulated activity. As long as they're not permanently mounted
or moving all the time. Well, actually, moving would be even better.
It might be better. You're right. Yeah.
So I can imagine the projects are each a custom challenge. I think I would predict the challenge is what makes it interesting every day.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There's no cookie cutter at all. We try to have a process, a fairly standard process, but then it's the details within this phased process that is very customized based on the client's goals, the site conditions, the regulatory constraints, all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a house in Essex, I recall. It was built right on the shore, or it was actually had its own little sort of inlet. Not sure how that happened. And it had like this glass tower on top of the roof. Well, it kind of turned out that was the lookout for suspicious activity that was going in and out of that house all the time. So it's like
interesting.
Directly into the Connecticut River. So it's like back and forth.
Yeah.
It was beautiful.
Yeah, a lot of history in Essex. I'm sure. Yeah.
Well, you have the haunted, inn there. And I love Connecticut. I'm from Michigan, and I went to Manhattan and then Boston. But my first house was in East Haddam because I could afford it. Sure. Now I can't. But, and so I would predict that the market of the customers that you have up there is insane, in terms of just the wealth that is in Connecticut at this point. They're coming up from New York, and then they keep coming up. I mean, New Hampshire has benefited as well, but there's only so much shore. Well, of course, New Hampshire is like 18 miles. I mean, it's,
Yeah.
there's few homes that are actually literally on the shore. Boar's Head, maybe a little,
Right. Right. Yeah. Rye.
Right. Yep. And then a lot of the houses are on the other side of Ocean Boulevard because you can't be on the, when the storms come in, they have to take plows to plow the rocks off the road that blow in from the beaches, And so how does that, have you been involved in how some of these properties are impacted by the ever increasing storm surges and floods and tsunamis? And I think there was a very famous tsunami that went all completely over Long Island and then into Connecticut in 18 something. Did you hear about that? It's like,
you might be right. The big one that's in our almost weekly conversation is the hurricane of 1938.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Yep.
That's what you're thinking of. Okay.
Yep.
So that one came through and just destroyed so much of not only coastal structures, but coastal shoreline as well. Mm-hmm. And that is what it initiated the first set of regulations in Connecticut to regulate coastal development.
Oh, that's interesting.
So if a structure survived the hurricane of 38, it is truly grandfathered. So whenever we're looking at a new project, and if we always look at that, so the state provides 1934 aerials. So if a structure can be seen in the 1934 aerial, then there's a good chance that it's grandfathered, that it survived the hurricane of 38. And it allows us to work with that footprint to rebuild it or repair it.
Yeah, so I think Katharine Hepburn, one of the stories is some guy bought a barometer and he said, geez, this thing doesn't work. And he went back to Manhattan because it was like off the chart. And that's because the storm was happening. So it saved his life.
Yeah.
And then the story of Katharine Hepburn, I think she was in Old Saybrook and she walked away to safety during that storm of some sort. And then she could make good movies. But,
yeah, of course. Yeah.
And then, but I didn't know that they had, I don't know how many aerials they could have in 1938 or 34 or whatever. We have sort of the same thing on like Lake Winnipesaukee. I sold a house and there was a boat dock and a huge dock. And the question is whether they could rebuild it. And I went to UNH that has the aerial photos of when they were redoing Route 11 along the shore. It was amazing they had that, and it was like spy satellites, images, because they had to show that it was there for that. It was like, if it's before July of 1967, it was grandfathered. And there it was, which was amazing.
Beautiful.
And I think that same storm hit here because the Marriotts have property on Lake Winnipesaukee, and there's a tree that they have on their yard. It's like this gigantic pine tree that survived, and it's still, the trunk right now is like 6.5 feet wide or something like that, but it was like the tree that stood.
Wow.
And then here we had more recently the 100-year flood. I don't know if you use the term 100-year flood there.
Yeah, I mean, it's more user friendly than the 1% chance flood.
Oh, is that another name?
Which is what it is.
The 1%.
Which is what it. Yeah, that's what it technically is.
Oh.
Because it has a 1% chance of occurring.
Oh.
You say 100-year flood, right? You think, it happens once every 100 years, which is not the case.
Right.
So
here, I think it was 2000.
Chance of happening.
They call it the Mother's Day flood here, 2006. And it changed, it redirected rivers. I gained a dock from my neighbor that it floated down to my house. And then
look at that.
My road was unpassable, for a long, there's a 300-foot section that was, we were all stuck. And then I think the next year there was another one. So, that's 200-year. But FEMA was just building what the flood levels were, and they had to change everything because of it,
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And that's how all regulations and codes happen, right? When something new changes or a new disaster, you know, maps, regulations, codes are updated to try to respond, to try to adapt.
Have you seen a big change in the weather? I mean, there's people who deny there's any such thing as global warming or climate change and that kind of stuff. But I mean, I see it since I've been in New Hampshire. I've seen it, in terms of how it
Yeah.
affects lakes and things like that. It seems like storms are getting worse and maybe more often, and that can. And I remember when I had my house there was a dam that broke in, was it Essex? One of those, a dam broke and then it flooded out below it. It was a huge problem. It went into is maybe it's not. It wasn't Essex. It was near it. Well, everything's near it, but and it washed out half a town. And this was maybe 30,
Mm.
40 years ago. But that's more of a breach of a dam, which is a man-made structure. Do you get involved in those kinds of projects? Because it's
I do get asked, but I typically don't. So a lot of the projects I get involved with, we do have engineers on the team, so structural and civil. But dams is a very specific type of engineering that we don't dabble in. So we try to like to know our lane and stick in it.
well, here in New Hampshire, some of the biggest dam builders are beavers.
Yeah,
They-
absolutely.
and you can't just blow up
Mhm.
a beaver dam. You have to take it out stick by stick or something.
Yeah,
I do have a funny AI video that I did of me helping a beaver build a house, which is pretty funny.
yeah. Oh, they are great architect, like master builders, I guess you could call them.
Yeah,
You know,
it's amazing that what they're
yeah.
able to do without a college
Yes,
education. So
right. Just learning and instincts. It's
I wonder
fascinating.
if a lot
Yeah,
of studies been done with how beavers build a structure like that in architecture these days. I don't know.
I would think so. I'm sure someone has done a study. I can't imagine, because there are very few creatures who do that. So it's very unique, especially in a water-based environment. Yeah,
Yeah. And who thought the good idea is to have the entrance underwater?
right. Well, fascinating. It just keeps the predators out.
Yeah.
Unless you can hold your breath and swim underwater,
Yeah.
you're,
That,
you're out of luck.
well, tell me a little bit. We're going to wrap this up, but how do people find you? You have your
So you
website.
can
Yeah.
find me. You can go to my website, shoredesignpllc.com, and you'll see what we do, and you can reach out to us that way.
Now, what does PLLC stand for? I'm just being ignorant.
So professional limited liability company.
Oh, so that's like an LLC, but it's a professional version of an LLC.
Exactly.
Maybe.
Yeah. The statute changed before I started the firm. So if you're a licensed professional, like an architect, then that is the designation that they want you to take.
Well, that's interesting. I wonder if that's even here. I don't even know. I mean, I have
Yeah, I
LLCs.
don't
I
know.
have an LLC. It's easy to do, but
Sure. Yeah, a lot of
that's,
people have LLCs. Yeah, so that's the distinction is the P. Yeah.
oh, okay. I never knew what it meant. So I figured since you mentioned it, I'll ask you.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah.
well,
That's a fair
thank
question.
you
I
very
get asked
much. I
it
mean,
from time to time.
oh, that's good. So you mean I'm not original? What is it? What are you saying? So
Well, no, not with that one, but I appreciate the question.
like, well, it was very nice talking to you. I mean, this is all I do I learn something every time. Certainly what you do can translate into things that get done on any of the 1,300 lakes. Of course, we have, I think the Connecticut River was listed as the most beautiful river in the country or something at one point.
Yeah, sounds familiar. Yeah.
And Connecticut is very fond memories for me. The history, the beauty, it's the age and that kind of stuff. And the shores, I think we take for granted. I didn't know about the 1938 that was sort of determined whether what you have is grandfather. Interesting.
Yeah, that's in Connecticut because they were hit so hard. So
Right.
yeah,
And it cleaned
yeah.
up Long Island in the process, right? So
It did. It really, cleaned out a lot of weak structures. Yeah.
that's,
Yep.
and then they built malls.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Well, thank you. And you have a
Yeah.
great day. It was really nice talking to you. Thanks for tuning in to the Waterfront Agent Podcast. I'll be back with some more stories, tips, and expert interviews, and hopefully some humor. So make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode.